I'd probably do the same. But I don't expect us to be here too late, but I do want to, oh, just leave it right there, that's fine. I do want to just kind of go through some highlights from the last few chapters, and then I definitely want to sit down and just have a conversation. As I said, I don't really want this to be a lecture. I want it to be more conversational. It's kind of hard though when I'm trying to go through some information. But just to kind of recap, if you have this first page, that's really our focus from last time, was going through this circle of where people are at spiritually speaking. This is just a very simplistic picture, okay? Salvation, people growing in faith, it doesn't fit neatly into these little pieces of pie. People are more complicated and messy than that. But there's some generalities that I think are very true. If you think about your own spiritual life, at some point you heard the gospel. At some point you responded to the gospel. Before that time, before you responded to the gospel and were saved or born again, the scripture says that you're dead, you're in unbelief. You become born again, and that is the beginning of your discipleship journey, okay, as you begin walking with the Lord. And so that is your infancy, your spiritual infancy. Now, a person can be, quote unquote, a Christian for a very long time and really never move much out of infancy. There are people who I've met who have gray hair, and I think, oh, they must know everything about the Lord. They've been Christians for so long. But when I actually get to know their character and what they believe and their practices, you find maybe it's not just age. It's not just age and time, but it's really experience with the Lord, but it's also responsiveness. Some people grow very quickly. It's because they're more responsive than other people. And so you have infants to child, to young adult, to parent. That's kind of how this book breaks up that discipleship maturation process. Just like a child growing into manhood or womanhood, an infant to child to young adult, and then parent. Different experiences, different temperaments, different things that each group needs, okay? And so we walked through some of these last time. What is the unsaved need? Well, they need a relationship with somebody who knows the Lord. They need the gospel. They need to hear it. They need to see Jesus lived out. I'm in last week, so I'm not reading anything for this week yet. So if you're shuffling through things, I'm reading my notes from last time. But that's people who need to have the gospel shared with them. Then as spiritual infants, well, infants need a lot of protection. They need a lot of care. They need a lot of milk of the word. They need the word explained to them. They need a lot of investment, okay? But infants are also temperamental, okay? And sometimes you get temperamental people in a church, and oftentimes it's because they're not really displaying spiritual maturity. They're not really of age yet in their spiritual maturity. And so going then to children, children are very self-centered, they're prideful, they have a low view of God, they're very I-focused. And so the book kind of points out some things that people at that process need. They need to be part of that spiritual family. They need to begin feeding themselves. You can't eat milk your entire life. You need to start processing heavier food. You need relationships with mature believers. You need expectations from your church and accountability. So that's about where we left off. I wanted to go through more, but I wanted to go through that whiteboard project that we had. If you remember, we went through the 25 people who have visited the church over the last 2 years and kind of talked about how we as a church, as people interested in discipleship, what are some things that we can do personally? What can we do as a church in a framework to really make sure that we have done diligence and made sure people know, hopefully, one, that we love them, that we want them to know the Lord. We are actively sharing our faith with them. We're looking to get involved in their life, and then we're looking to maybe set up time with them to study the Bible, to encourage them. I want to make sure that our church doesn't have holes where people are slipping through, where we can really make sure to help people, one, hopefully discover Christ, and then what did Jesus say in the Great Commission? Teaching them to observe all things I've commanded. So it can't just stop at evangelizing. It has to move into discipleship to really fulfill the commands of Christ. So what I want to do tonight is, on your sheet, it says chapters 14, 15, but I am going to go and spend a little bit of time in chapter 10 and 11, and then jump into those last chapters. Okay, so why don't we pray, and I'll do, like I said, my little overview, and then I want to sit down and let you guys talk about this kind of stuff. I also want to share some things that, what is the next phase? We're finished with this book. I had some ideas at the beginning, before we even started this book, and I want to switch gears. I have a different idea I want to share tonight, and so I want to spend a little time with that too. So let's pray and ask God to bless our time. Lord, thank you for this opportunity, for people who are thoughtful and concerned about the lost around them, people who want to see the lost not only saved, but to come into maturity. Lord, that we have been impressed upon in our spirit that we have a responsibility to those around us to help them at whatever stage they're at, to move forward in Christ. And Lord, as we seek that out for ourselves in our own discipleship, that we would look at people who maybe aren't as far along as us, or maybe people who are like us where we're at with the Lord, and then encourage each other, encourage others that might not know and might not have spiritual maturity, to help grow them in the Spirit. Lord, I pray that you'll help our church have a mentality, a philosophy of discipleship that is easily shared and understood by the church, that we would be known as a discipling church. Lord, I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so if you have your book, I'll be going through chapter 10, 11, 12, 13, kind of fast. Just some highlights. One of the chapters is just warnings. One big warning. Don't put people in leadership positions. Don't put people in small group leadership positions that don't have spiritual maturity. Okay, you can create a lot of issues for yourself and the church. Good chapter on just things, warnings. But where we left off was we talked about infants, children in the Lord. Now, how about young adults and parents? What are some characteristics of people who go from the self-centeredness of childhood? And it's kind of interesting. You see this. I've seen this with some of our teens as they are growing in their teenage years, some who have moved into their early 20s. You can see them moving from child to young adult in their spiritual maturity, because what you see, they're service-oriented. They're zealous. They're excited about their faith. They share their faith. They're God-centered, others-centered, mission-oriented, independent. They don't need to be told and reminded to keep their spiritual disciplines. They're keeping them themselves. That's part of that young adult in the Lord. Okay. We begin to see these people. What do we need to see them do? We need to see them learn to fend off bad influences, fend off wolves in sheep's clothing, fend off things in their early 20s that are going to be attractive, maybe ungodly relationships, ungodly media, things, even in ungodly environments and peer influences. They have to fend off those things. They have to fight those things, but also learn to feed themselves. That's what this group begins to do. And we have to help them. We can't continue spoon feeding. They have to find answers for themselves. And so there is a process by which at this point in their maturity, they have to take some ownership. They have to take some responsibility. I think I've heard it in this church. Maybe Dale, you've said it. You can't ride on the coattails of your parents. Okay? Your faith, if it's a genuine faith, must be your own faith. And that will become evident once you graduate high school and you're no longer under their authority. Some of the proof is in the pudding. We'll begin to see what you truly believe in after you're not under that kind of authority. So what does a young adult need? Head, heart, and hands. Very simply, you have to have knowledge, right? You have to know some things about the scriptures, about Jesus. But then you have to not just have head knowledge. That head knowledge is also becoming heart knowledge. And you're beginning to understand relationally how important relationship is to true discipleship. Okay? To have somebody really invested in you and them, and that partnership, that relationship, where you're teaching them of the things of Christ, that is done oftentimes when a person has learned to trust you. There has to be relationship. So head, yes, you have to know something. Heart, you begin to grow a heart, concern for people and where they're at. And then hands, you begin to be very service-oriented. Look for places where you can be a help. So young people, generally we see that. They also need a place to serve. They need to know what's difficult about some churches. They have a really hard time passing the baton to the next generation. Sometimes it's because they've gotten burned. Maybe that younger generation, they handed the baton and then it got dropped. Responsibility was said, we'll take care of it, and then it wasn't followed through on. And so sometimes churches that are really suffering, churches that are dying, some of them, the general issue when you break down the autopsy of a dead church, why churches die, one of the issues is one generation cannot pass leadership to the next generation. Okay? Young people in the Lord who are maturing need a place to serve. They need to be given trust. They need to see themselves there. They need to be given responsibility. If they feel shut out, they'll find it somewhere else. Okay? And so we need to find them a place to serve. Not just plug them in wherever's convenient. You know, they might have some ideas, some leading, some places they want to serve specifically. And so we need to help them as a church discover that. What else does a young adult need? They need spiritual parenthood. And parenthood changes. I think Dale and Angie, again, they've kind of helped illustrate some of this. As a parent, you become, what have you said? It goes from like coach to mentor or something along those lines. The idea, though, is that you have a period of time where you're very over them. And then you kind of become more of a, I forget the term that you've used before.
Educator?
Like an educator, yeah. You're definitely somebody who's giving advice, but it's also understanding you have to let go. The tethers, there's no tether anymore. They're on their own. They have to figure these things out for themselves. That's hard for parents to do. Sometimes we want to helicopter around our young 20-year-olds, and it's like, yes, when it's something dangerous, yes. If it's something that they just might have to learn a hard lesson, you got to let them learn the hard lesson, and that's hard for parents to do. But they need a spiritual parent that will help them process through these things. Don't just, oh, they're 18 now, they're good. No, they still need some mentoring. They need encouragement and accountability. They need boundaries. They also need pace. Some people, young people who are really excited about the things of the Lord, they need to be taught how to pace themselves because they will burn themselves out. They can take on too much. So they need to learn also how to say no. They need to learn boundaries. Boundaries are healthy, okay? People have an issue. We know people who have issues, even in ministry, who have a hard time saying no and creating those boundaries, and then it really creates contention in other places in their life. And so we have to also, I like this from the book, we have to help them temper expectations. We all have expectations of how people are going to respond to us in the gospel. How often are our expectations met and exceeded in the heart of other people? No, generally we're kind of let down, okay, is what generally happens. What I mean is, I go to jail, I have this vision of everyone coming to the Lord and, listening and participating, and it's an exciting thing. And then I get there, and they're distracted, they're ornery, they're whatever, and so my expectation, young people have a vision for how things should be, and I'm an eternal optimist. I do too, and I get let down a lot because I have these expectations of how things will be, and it doesn't happen, okay? That can be very frustrating to a young adult in the Lord. They have to learn, though, expectations need to be tempered. The people that we serve are oftentimes messy, oftentimes coming through a lot of trauma, coming through a lifetime and a lifestyle of mistakes. This is going to be otherworldly for them. It is going to be a whole nother culture, a whole nother language. Becoming a Christian, it can be a fearful thing. They're going to make mistakes, so we have to temper expectations at this. It doesn't mean that we lower standards. You understand what I mean? Understand, keep high standards, but understand people are going to let you down, okay? And that's just part of ministry. People make promises and they don't deliver, people, you're depending on them, it doesn't get done. That's part of ministry, okay? So young people need to be helped with that. Also, identify their gifts and hone their skills. So that's characteristics of the young adult. Characteristic of parents. All right, here's what we like about parents. And here's the only difference. Really the only functional difference. We got one more here for you. The only functional difference between a young adult and a parent is the young adult has not yet had children. Do you know what I mean? But the parent has. And here's what it is. You're talking about people who have the same knowledge or very similar knowledge, maybe some similar experiences. But the difference between a young 20-year-old who's just right on point with the things of the Lord versus a parent is that a parent in the Lord has already begun to develop fruit in the form of converts who then they are discipling. Okay? And I would say that's what this book points out, is that you're not really a spiritual parent until you are tending to infants, like a parent tends to an infant. Okay? Now, you might, as a young adult, might not have brought that person to a saving knowledge of Jesus, but you are dealing with them in their infancy. So you are very similar to a parent. Okay? This book kind of describes a parent as somebody who goes through that entire journey from non-believer to born-again believer to infant, then into their maturity. Okay? Not to say a 20-year-old isn't there. I've known soul-winning 20-year-olds. I really have. I've known people who have just had a zeal for the Lord, and at a young age, God has called them into parenting spiritual infants. Oftentimes, those people are called to ministry. I don't know if you've seen that, they're specially gifted to do the work of the Lord. One of the indications that the Lord has called them into that work is because of the fruit that they're seeing through their ministry. Okay? So, parents, if you're on that page down there, characteristics of parents, they're already sharing, connecting, ministering, discipling. They have a strategic purpose. I recently asked Rebecca to walk me through what she does in the jail. You want to talk about strategic purpose. It was like, I describe Courtney this way sometimes, is like we have like, her war room, her war table, and she has all the addresses and her notes and, all of her things laid out. And she's like, she's on mission, and she's thinking about who she's sending letters of encouragement to and who needs a track. And Rebecca pulls out all of her stuff that she uses, and it's like taking the whole table. The point is, she's showing me, I do this with the lady at this time. This is the lesson after that. And I check box here, so I know that this is strategic, okay? Thought through. A parent in the Lord is very intentional. You can't just kind of gunsling it, it takes a little bit more. If you're really working with people and really helping them to develop systematically, I would say the failure of most churches is there are gaping holes in a lot of people's basic theological foundation. They just don't have it. There's holes. They get this thing, they've got salvation so good, oh man, they've got this thing but there are things that they just don't have, okay? A very strategic, intentional parent who's discipling infants into childhood, they will cover those bases. They are looking to fill those holes and really create a robust curriculum of theology so people will understand it, okay? So, intentional, strategic, a coaching mindset, reproduction-oriented, self-feeding, missions-minded, team-minded. You have people who are really dependable. I would say in a church, these are the people who are often in our church, your Sunday school leaders, those that are involved in the jail ministry, people who are already in discipleship making ministry, Kids for Truth, youth group, and so it's having within this group, this parent, they need direction, they need a team to play on, okay? They need a church that they can invest in and that the church is investing into them. Some people who might not be tapped yet need an invitation. Hey, I think you'd be great at this. Have you ever thought about that? Or you have a burden for that and you go to the pastor, you go to the leadership of a church and you go, I would really like to try this. And the church says, well, yeah, I'd like to see you do that. If that's what your burden is. And so, something that they need to be recognized, and this is what I mean. I don't mean praised as in recognized. Recognized meaning they don't need attention, they need to be understood. We trust you. We believe in you. You are a teacher through this church. Then they need to be released, okay? And go into the world, okay? They need to be supported through various means. And then also, something that I would like to do with our teaching and as we look at how to look at our Christian education in our church, accountability. How can I keep tabs? How can I be a source of encouragement? How can I know what our teachers are teaching in a very intentional way? Christian education, having some oversight on that, some accountability, so the people don't feel like they're out there by themselves. And that people, they're by themselves, they don't really feel connected, they really don't know if anybody really understands what they do. Well, let's change that. That's a culture change, it's a simple fix, okay? We just need to have those conversations. So, they need encouragement, church family, they need relationship with co-laborers, okay? And so, that's chapter 13, where we left off, like 9, 10, 11, 12. There's some other things. There's this chapter about, what did they call it? I don't really care for their philosophy and small groups, so I didn't really include that. Curriculum for small groups. It's an interesting idea, but it's not really something that I'm really looking to work through our church, so I didn't really include any of that. I want you to go to chapter 14, or in your little sheet here. Chapter 14. Let me ask you a question. What are some differences between spiritual leaders and organizational leaders? Organizational leaders and spiritual leaders. What are some differences? You can cheat if you look forward a little bit. Anybody have one to share?
I think that's the difference between management and leadership. Management is something you do, leadership is something you are.
Yep. Something you do versus something that you are. Every spiritual leader needs to have some level of organizational skill. How many people are brilliant at organization, but they don't have much spiritual maturity? Do we want a highly organized individual to be in charge of spiritual ministry? We can get into some danger there, okay? Because character is king. Character counts more than ability. You go through I've said this from the pulpit, you go through the pastoral epistles. Of all the requirements of a pastor, one is apt to teach. All the others are character driven. God cares more about character than he does about ability. Okay? Ability is necessary, especially for that office. But it is smaller, I believe, than some of the character requirements that office demands. So, every disciple is called to disciple. I think that's pretty clear. We spent our first week in that. Every disciple is called to become a spiritual parent to someone. Okay? Some people are more spiritually gifted in administration. You can see over in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, that verse literally talks about the gifts of the church. One of the gifts in the church is administration. That gift missed me, okay? It just flew right by, okay? I'm not much of an administrator. You look at Pastor Greg, who I admire, because what does he have? He has the gift of administration. He really does, okay? And so, I can be jealous of that gift, or I can say, hey, this body can use some of that. Let's incorporate some of that gift into our fold. And that's what we do with a variety of gifts, okay? I don't have all those gifts, but there are people in this body that do. Leadership, spiritual leadership versus natural leader. Here's the issue. Like a pastor that's called because he's charismatic, not like Pentecostal, but he's charismatic. He's a people person. People like him. He's an eloquent speaker. People will put hands on that man and say, "Oh, the anointed of the Lord," right? When he has no character. Same thing happens in ministry sometimes, where somebody is a very good organizational manager, but they don't have the spiritual maturity needed. And so they're placed in positions of authority and responsibility for spiritual things, but they're not terribly spiritually minded. That can lead to conflict, okay? What do we need to see in our church? We need to see these organizational leaders who also have spiritual attributes. So think about this list here: godly commitment, initiative, courage, passion, focus, humility, a team mindset. These are some of the spiritual requirements as well to the organizational requirements. This book talks a lot about small groups. Here's what I want to see in teachers in our church, and I think we can be pretty general here. I want to see a person, as if they're going to teach, if they're going to disciple through our church, one-on-one, small groups, be a Sunday school teacher, I want there to be a godly commitment in their life. I want that person to have a vibrant relationship with Jesus Christ. Okay, that's first and foremost. Secondly, I want to see that they are a self-starter. They take initiative. Somebody comes to me and says, I'm really thinking about a ministry like this. Or, I've never volunteered for this. What do you think? Would I be a good fit for that? Okay, that's initiative. That's somebody thinking about themselves, their skill set, seeing a need, wanting to be a part of that. Courage. To be a leader, you have to be able to confront issues. Another thing, for me, I have a hard time with. I have a hard time confronting. I'm not very courageous when it comes to certain things, certain hard decisions that need to be made. I know that about myself. It's something that I'm trying to work on. But a leader has to be courageous, has to be willing to go to that brother or sister and to lead. Passionate, their passion is catching. Their passion creates passion in the heart of other people. I think that is a pastoral call. I think a pastor that's kind of a dud, doesn't really come with much emotion, much, and it can get out of whack, but not much passion. It's hard to instill passion in the hearts of your congregants if you're not passionate yourself. I remember Charles Wesley said, if a pastor lights himself on fire every week, people will come from all around to see him burn. You know what I mean? Yeah, because people like fire. They want to see that passion. And so their excitement, a teacher in our church needs to be excited about the things that they're saying, okay? Not easily discouraged, because that is going to come into ministry. You can't be wishy-washy. You can't pack up your toys and go home. You have to stick it out. You have to have gumption. You have to fight through the feeling of just wanting to be done, okay? Because those feelings are going to come. Focus, another one that I have issue with. But how long does it take to really establish a new ministry in a church and for it to really take root and really become part of that church? Years? Is that pretty fair?
Yeah.
But then it becomes, well, yeah, we've always done that. Like that's part of our church, Focus. Not easily distracted, not easily discouraged. A leader of ministry, a teacher, a discipler has to have focus because people are messy too. I get ghosted all the time. All the time. I got ghosted already twice this week. That might be a record. It's Monday and I've got ghosted twice. It's gonna happen though. And you know what? Just like, I'll get them next time. If you don't, you're in trouble, okay? Because that will become a plateau and then, a downward trend. You cannot be taken off the trail by those kinds of things. Humility, have to be able to work on a team. That's the thing, as we're talking about these different committees. We have to learn to work as a team and dispense grace to each other. I think teachers of our church having more interconnectedness, knowing what each other are doing, knowing specifically how can I pray for you, having those conversations I think is going to be so beneficial. So we don't feel like we're in silos. We don't. Nothing in the Christian life is in silos. Okay, it's integrated. A team mindset. We really need to, through our strengths, help people who have weaknesses, and where we're weak, use the strengths of others, okay? And that's having that team mindset. If you have your book, go to page 175. There's a paragraph here, and it was challenging to me, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this. Let me read this paragraph. 175, it's the first full paragraph, really it's the second paragraph about third of the way down. It says, too often, churches are one-dimensional. If the senior pastor is a teacher, the church will focus on that one gift rather than become, with the help of other believers, a multi-dimensional church. These churches revolve around teaching. They do not provide a place for people to grow up by serving in a discipleship environment. People who attend such churches tend to be too busy to be in a relational small group. They love the pastor's teaching and are part of the 20% of people who have an auditory learning style. Such churches can experience a growth spurt as the pastor's style attracts certain people with the same bent as him. But the growth is not sustainable, nor does it mean that people are becoming spiritually mature. Here's the challenge I get from this, and I guess here's the question. We've discussed how people learn. Most people don't learn best in a lecture, okay? And that's the format of most preaching services, is very lecture-oriented. Where people grow generally is in a small group or a one-on-one situation where they're studying something out with somebody where there's interaction. Would you guys agree with that? Or do you have a hard time? Where do you learn best? Let me ask you that.
I'm really not understanding your question. You want to run that by me one more time?
I learn the best when I'm doing it,
When you're experiencing it?
when I'm experiencing it.
Where do you learn the Bible best?
At home?
Yep. At home, personal study, actually doing it, learning what the lesson's going to be, teaching the lesson to another person helps you prepare it and go through it. I mean, can we admit maybe, now preaching service has a purpose, right? It's calling man to his God. You know, there's good purpose in a preaching service. Where do people generally grow the most? It's generally in not a lecture format. It is in a one-on-one, a small group, a personal study. That's where people generally learn the best. What this chapter is, or what this paragraph is talking about, is that a church that does not have a discipleship focus, the fear is that it attracts a crowd, but the crowd doesn't deepen because they're an audience, not a participant. Does that make sense? And that's the mentality. It depends how a person comes to church. Does the person have a pen in hand and they're listening and they're writing and they're going to check those scriptures when they get home and they're going to chew on that message for that week and think about how that applies to other things that they're studying? Are they really investing, or are they listening and they leave the same way that they arrived? They're not changed by it because they're an audience member. They're not a participant. They're not really ingesting. That's the fear. It's hard to not ingest when you're one-on-one with somebody, right? When you're in a small group, it's very hard to get away from, what do you think? And you have to engage with the person. When I'm up there, guys, you don't have to engage with me. And I know people who don't. Just bloop, turn off the bell tones, they're just not there. God love them, but my point is this. A church that has teachers and spiritual parents, why aren't I using those spiritual parents to parent small groups and individual discipleship ministry? Let me give you an example. And this was totally organic, and I'm so proud of it. Is with Hallie and Aaron, okay? Wednesday night, I do, after the prayer time, a little devotional, okay? Little devotional time. And Aaron began taking Hallie to do some one-on-one discipleship, going through a book with her. Kudos. I'm like, that's exactly it. That is what you don't need more of me, okay? What people need is investment from other people, someone there who can answer questions, go through those topics with those people in a small group or a one-on-one setting. And that's kind of, this book obviously is oriented to small groups. It doesn't mean we throw out the baby with the bathwater and we just, we're not gonna do preaching services anymore. No, preaching services have a point. How many times do you need to hear my voice preaching at you in a week? Versus having...
wanted to answer.
Let's keep it rhetorical. But imagine that you have a small group of people at different maturity levels that you're helping grow, you're preparing a lesson for. Like you're getting something out of that, they're getting something out of it, that personal connection, you're creating community. That's what I think we need more of in the church than a traditional, teaching lecture atmosphere kind of lesson. Some churches now are even taking times of their other services and they're saying, hey, instead of Sunday school, you can do a small group, you can be in a one-on-one, and they take that hour and they just do small groups, which when I say small, I mean they've got the space for it and they can break into smaller groups than larger classroom settings, or one-on-one, and they're using that time for people to really get those check-ins. How are you doing? How are you really doing? Okay, how are you really doing? Okay, because sometimes you get and then the waterworks start, because now they're willing to tell you what's really going on. I'm afraid that we stay pretty topical when we stay in a lecture kind of format, generally speaking. Okay, so those are some of those thoughts. If you go to the back, I put a couple of quotes that kind of pointed out to me. Confront the status quo the church has lived with for too long. Sometimes churches can become complacent. Sometimes churches aren't really discipling people anymore. Some churches don't have, Sunday school ministry. They don't have kids programming. They don't do those kinds of things, and it's just these kind of lecture-oriented preaching services. It's easy to just kind of slip into those, slip out, not really engage with the word, not really think about it, and just leave the same way that you came. This other quote about being intentional, be reproducible. As I was talking about Rebecca's jail study that she does with the ladies, everything there is reproducible. She can take the same person through the same thing, know that person is on lesson 7. She will know what that person had lessons 1 through 6 and what she's going to have next. That's what I'm talking about. Actually, intentionality is reproducible. So you can read the rest of this one, chapter 15. I want to stop talking at you. I wanted to stop talking at you 15 minutes ago. Make sure that there's nothing here that needs to be said. It just talks about how leaders are developed in the local church, and then that helps serve the local church. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the camera, and then we can kind of talk about some of these things, and then I'll share some ideas with you for what comes next. So let me turn that off really quickly.
You work up to jail with young women and stuff? Doing that.